Rise of the Robots is not a good game. That'll do it. Shut down the video, go home everyone, we're done here. It's not exactly a big revelation. Rise of the Robots is one of the internet's general whipping boys. We've done it ourselves. One of my favourite Yestazine specials involved unravelling the conspiracy that led to it getting 92% in Amiga Action and 5% in Amiga Power in the same month. Frankly, it was a video I wanted to create before I was creating videos. And we'll get to that story, but in short, Amiga Power was right. The Amiga version is fatally flawed, even beyond the general badness of Rise of the Robots. But crucially, it's not the worst version of the game. Let's start a beef with the internet first though, because, perhaps just because they're the easiest ones to get running, the version you'll see most often on worst games lists is one of the two 16-bit console ones on the two machines you've immediately assumed they would be on. And here's the thing. Rise of the Robots on those systems is not terrible. It's absolutely not good either, mind. It's just a fairly generic 16-bit beat-em-up that plays like a fairly generic 16-bit beat-em-up. There's much worse offenders on both badly rendered graphics and badly rendered gameplay available. I'd suggest Primal Rage for the first and the mind-bogglingly broken Ultraman game for the second. If channels use these as bad games, to be honest they're not wrong, but they're being a bit lazy. The characters can jump over each other in Rise on Mega Drive for instance. There's background music. You would think these things would be minimum requirements for a fighting game by the early 90s, but be prepared for a shock. The game, thankfully, did not make the more traditional 32-bit consoles, at least not until its sequel, which is a whole new can of shit game. It did make the CDI and 3DO though, which somehow is still not the worst version, despite the lack of both in-game music and jumping over each other. Although we have now absolutely crossed the line into genuinely awful. On these fearsome next-generation powerhouses, it somehow manages to look worse than the SNES and Mega Drive ones do. If I told you they tried to squeeze it into the Master System-derived Game Gear, you'd probably assume that was going to be the worst version. But somehow still no. Again, it's not good, but it's a functional game and somehow manages to squeeze in-game music in. The backgrounds are straight from Colour Branding Depot, mind, but it even manages a version of the fancy video intros from the Big Brother versions. Frankly, I think this might actually be the best effort of the lot given the host hardware. Nope, of the commonly known versions, the trio of near identical ones on the Amiga hardware is indeed the worst. Firstly, it has both the common problems we've talked about, no background music and you can't jump over opponents. And because the graphics only work one way, while it has a two-player mode, the first person always has to be the main character, and your friend can only be everyone except the main character. If you have the version on floppy disks, it comes on 13 of them, and the intro takes up nearly half that. Said intro has been put on said disks so badly that to watch it, you'll find yourself literally swapping disks in the middle of a sentence. And playing the game isn't better, with multiple swaps between the same two discs being the general procedure between any fight you have. And the promised Brian May soundtrack? Well, I can play you the entire thing with absolutely no fear of a copyright claim. Because here it is. Yes, the game cuts it off that dramatically. That's not the worst thing though. The reason the Amiga version is special is this. On all but the high difficulties, you can pretty much win the entire game by holding the joystick, or in the case of this CD32 version, the joypad, up and right. That's it. On all the enemies. Even the end boss. And yet still, the Amiga version is not the worst version, because if it was, I wouldn't have had to make this video. There is worse, because there is a Rise of the Robots arcade machine. And even more astonishingly, it came out after all the home ports had been and gone. So with plenty of time to learn the lessons and use as much power as they liked to make it all work. It's perhaps worth starting by looking briefly at the competition. This is 1995. 3D was heading for homes, but it had very much arrived in arcades, being led by Namco's classic Tekken, and they were about to follow that up with Soul Edge, which would become the Soul Calibur series. And there was Virtua Fighter 2 already, with Tekken 2 also right on the horizon. In 2D fighters in arcades there was Street Fighter Alpha, Killer Instinct and Mortal Kombat 3. These were the games that Mirage and Time Warner were going to have to put their upgraded Rise of the Robots up against in the incredibly competitive world of an arcade where quick reviews and first impressions were critical. So let's risk the copyright strike and take a look. And ignoring the hideously looped music, that could be worse. An abridged version of, shall we say, the classic intro. Some decent rendering. The only downside is the only time we saw the game name it was tiny and off at an angle. Things start to go downhill at the actual attract loop though.
Watch this and learn.
Watch this and learn, she says, before showing you the first 10 seconds of a fight between two people who have never played Rise of the Robots, or indeed seen a video game ever before. And then that same thing loops again with a different useless 10 seconds. So far, all I'm learning by watching is that I should probably go to the Tekken machine to my right and give Namco my 50p instead. Remember that woman, by the way, we're not done with her. But the game also has a second intro in its attract loop, which, and let's give it its due here, becomes the first Rise of the Robots I've seen to actually use a good portion of Brian May's music. Which I'm hoping you'll be hearing, because chances are I'll have had to mute it. Either way, it's a cut down version of the song Resurrection from the album Back to the Light, which is the album that opens with The Dark, which is what the title riff from the other versions of Rise is taken from, and indeed the whole of the arcade's intro. If you remember your 90s pop rock, the considerably more famous Too Much Love Will Kill You and Driven by You directly follow this on the album. This is absolutely the high watermark of the series though, and I don't mean of the intros, I mean of the whole franchise. Because the thing we have to do now is play the arcade game. I shovel in a barrel load of 50p's and get to it. And the first plus, an actual choice of fighters. But we're going to go with the classic to make it a fair test. I think some of these are derived from the Rise sequel, which, like the May song, was called Resurrection. She's back, and she's going for the kind of chance that would have you laughed off the football terraces. But enough of that. Game! And the old upper right trick from the Amiga version does not work. Things are looking up. Unless... oh no. Oh no. Yep, the up, right and fire trick has, for this fight at least, been replaced by the towards and fire trick. That is literally one button simpler than winning Amiga matches. And of course, this is an arcade game. There's no difficulty levels, this is just what we got. How far can this take us? Well, fight 2 is with this guy, who frankly already looks ill. Scary Boss Lady is going through what must have been the result of a Friday night brainstorming session in the Mirage office, because that is appalling. As is fight 2. This guy's the worst of the Amiga enemies, being entirely unable to fight back when cornered, and it's pretty much true here too. He doesn't even attempt to escape and gets a couple of lame swipes in. Fight 3. What even is that smack talk? What even is that robot? It looks like the reject bin at Boston Dynamics, and unfortunately pretty much fights like it too. There's some brief spirited jumping, but basically this is the same as before, and that's 3 fights won with 2 controller inputs. Fight 4. This guy looks a little more athletic. What do you mean I'm going to need to try harder? It's not like it would be possible to try less hard than I've needed to try so far. This guy does indeed have some more pep. I'm putting in more effort than I have up to now. But I'm still just horizontal and punching. And then in the second round he gets cornered and just melts. We're now 5 fights into this arcade fighting game on 1 credit with the application of exactly no skill. Spoilers, but that at least is going to change a tiny bit. We're wasting your time. Right. First round goes smoothly, but, and this is now about to be a pattern, round 2 and they wake up some. We suffer a round defeat for the first time. Is it me, by the way, or is this model, which I think is from the later game, so much better rendered than ours, like they just grabbed them both off the original media? Fight 6 and we've met our match. Literally, you see, it's funny because it's us. And of course that means he's equal to us, and finally our run of 2-button fights is over. He ends our go. But we've got some more credits. Let's take another punt. You can incidentally skip the pre-fight CGI and get right back into what I will, for legal reasons, call action. But clearly our little tactic has run its race. So how far can I, a guy who can't get off the first level of a Mortal Kombat arcade machine, go? Surprisingly far, as it turns out, via the incredibly opaque Japanese art of crouching. This allows just enough of his attacks to pass over us that we win in straight sets and go on to what is now a lazy palette swap of Fight 2's enemy. With the exception of the boss, we may have seen the entire game. This guy requires some thought. Our initial attempt at the horizontal punch doesn't work. Crouching doesn't work. He is, after all, a very low enemy. You know what very nearly works? Our old friend the up and right. So let's try one final credit and see whether we finally reach the competence of the awful Amiga version 7 fights in. This is certainly our best tactic so far, and he shares his clone's vulnerability when trapped. Would guess if this lacked the ability to jump over each other like the Amiga version, this tactic would have worked immediately on this guy as it does on the Amiga. As it is, it's still surprisingly successful and we take the first round. With an ease that makes you think their learning AI might only be 99% bollocks, he rallies, takes the second round, and then loses to a dramatic combination of all of our skills so far, all of which could be performed by a 3-year-old. This is getting boring. You're telling me, game, and this is also where we will end. We're, I think, 80% through this game, and I could now easily do that far on 1 credit, and with a playtime the thick end of 15 minutes. This is easily the worst version of Rise, but also very bad when judged as an arcade game, for both the player and the machine owner. As far as I can tell, the Rise arcade never got a full official release. MAME has no useful metadata for it, and the one reference picture I found I really hope wasn't a final official cabinet. The technical detail though is revealing too. This is based on what MAME calls an Intel 486, but is actually a Cyrix 486 DLC Intel compatible chip running at a whole 33 MHz. This, as a PC CPU, was pitiful by 1995 when the 100+ MHz Pentiums were common, and isn't even as quick as a comparable Intel chip, as it was designed to be a drop-in replacement for 386 motherboards. And despite the D-branding, this did not mean it had a maths coprocessor like Intel D chips. It didn't. The chipset as a whole appears to have only ever been used elsewhere for a football quiz game. It's a piece of half-arsing to use a half-decade-old clone PC chip for your flagship arcade that's probably the absolute best summing up of Rise of the Robots from beginning to end we're ever going to find, really. But also that, if someone shows you the SNES version and says it's bad, then they're not wrong. But they really are only telling you 10% of the Rise of the Robots story. If you're new here, our bread, butter and paper is Yestazine, a monthly series about old gaming magazines whereby we play their highest and lowest rated games to see how they've aged, and look through the magazine for stories from the golden era. Subscribe with a free press of the button and YouTube might even tell you about them. In the meantime, I'm walking off stage to the right, still punching. Bye bye!